There is a gardening method so productive that a single eighth of an acre can replace your entire grocery bill. Not supplement it, replace it. 2,000 pounds of food from a space smaller than most suburban backyards. It has been practiced for decades by people who quietly opted out of the industrial food system. They don't talk about it much. They don't need to. They're too busy harvesting more food than their neighbors thought was physically possible. The grocery industry knows this method exists. They have seen the numbers. They have studied the research. And they have made absolutely sure you never learn how simple it actually is. Because if you understood what an eighth of an acre could really produce, you would never look at a grocery store the same way again. What I'm talking about is intensive, small-scale food production. And once you understand it, you'll wonder why anyone farms any other way. The concept challenges everything conventional agriculture has taught for generations. You don't need acreage. You don't need tractors. You don't need to spend thousands on equipment before your first seed goes into the ground. You need methods that have been proven by families who are doing this right now, producing more food than most people thought was physically possible from spaces their neighbors use for decorative lawns. So why isn't this front-page news? Why isn't this taught in every school? Why does the $800 billion grocery industry spend millions on advertising while families quietly feed themselves from their backyards? The answer reveals something deeply uncomfortable about who profits when you believe growing food is too hard, too time-consuming, and ultimately not worth the effort. Before we go deeper into this vault, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this knowledge is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these vaults with those who need to remember what we forgot. Let me introduce you to the family that proved the experts wrong. In 1985, a man named Jules Dervies Jr. made a decision that his neighbors thought was insane. He had just moved his family from a 10-acre farm in rural Florida to a tiny urban lot in Pasadena, California, just 15 minutes from downtown Los Angeles. The property was 1/10 of an acre, roughly 4,300 square feet, smaller than most suburban backyards. The kind of space that conventional wisdom said was useless for serious food production. His neighbors watched him rip out the lawn. They watched him remove the decorative plants. They watched him transform every available inch into growing space. They thought he had lost his mind. 40 years later, that tiny urban lot produces over 6,000 pounds of food annually. Let that number sink in for a moment. 6,000 pounds, 3 tons of food, from a space that most people would dismiss as too small to matter. The Dervies family grows over 400 different varieties of fruits, vegetables, and edible plants. They have citrus trees, berry bushes, vegetable beds, and vertical growing systems packed into every corner. They haven't purchased vegetables from a grocery store in decades. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. They earn over $20,000 per year selling surplus produce to local restaurants. The garden that was supposed to be impossible generates more income per square foot than almost any commercial farm in America. The land their neighbors dismissed as worthless pays for itself and then some. The family calls their approach biointensive regenerative practices. They don't just grow plants. They build soil biology. They create ecosystems. They work with nature instead of against it. Every year, their soil gets better. Every season, their yields increase. The garden that started as an experiment has become a model that thousands of people have traveled to see with their own eyes. And here's what nobody in the grocery industry wants you to understand. The Dervies family isn't special. They're not genetic farming prodigies. They didn't inherit secret knowledge from master gardeners. They learned through trial and error, through reading, through experimentation. Everything they know is available to anyone willing to learn it. But they're far from alone in proving what small spaces can produce. In Ohio, a family of 6 feeds themselves entirely from a 1/8 acre garden. That's approximately 5,400 square feet, about the size of a modest suburban lot. Their annual harvest exceeds 2,000 pounds of produce. Tomatoes, potatoes, beans, squash, greens, root vegetables, herbs, and berries. They grow it all. They preserve it, can it, freeze it, and store it. They eat from their garden year-round, even through Ohio winters. The grocery bill that averages nearly $10,000 per year for American families has been reduced to almost nothing. A few specialty items, some bulk grains, things they choose to buy rather than need to buy. Another grower documented over 1,000 pounds of produce from roughly 1,000 square feet in a single season. That's approximately 1 pound per square foot of growing space. Scale that math to an eighth of an acre, and you're looking at over 5,000 pounds of food from a backyard garden. A farmer in Washington state generates $65,000 annually from just 1/8 acre using intensive methods. Not a hobby garden. A legitimate farming business from a space most commercial farmers would consider a joke. These aren't outliers. These aren't people with unique advantages or special circumstances. These are ordinary people who discovered what the grocery industry hopes you never figure out. The limiting factor has never been land. It's always been knowledge. Now let me show you the science behind why this works. The method is called biointensive agriculture, and it was developed and refined over 50 years by a man named John Jevons through an organization called Ecology Action. The research is peer-reviewed. The results have been replicated across multiple continents. The data is available to anyone who wants to examine it. Here's what the science shows. Biointensive methods produce 2 to 6 times more food per unit of area compared to conventional agriculture. That's not marketing. That's documented research. The same space that produces 1 harvest using conventional methods produces 2 to 6 harvests using biointensive techniques. But the efficiency gains go far beyond just yield. Biointensive farms use 50 to 75% less land than conventional methods to produce the same amount of food. They use 50 to 100% less fertilizer. They use 67 to 88% less water. They use 94 to 99% less energy. Read those numbers again. Half to 3/4 less land, half to no fertilizer, 2/3 to nearly 90% less water, and almost no energy inputs compared to conventional agriculture. These aren't theoretical projections. These are measured results from farms using these methods around the world. So why isn't every agricultural school teaching this? Why isn't every farming program built around these techniques? The answer is money. And specifically, whose money? Agricultural education is heavily influenced by companies that sell fertilizers, pesticides, seeds, and equipment. The curriculum that gets taught is the curriculum that benefits the industries funding the research. Biointensive methods don't require expensive inputs. They don't need proprietary seeds. They don't demand chemical fertilizers or pesticide applications. They work with biology rather than chemistry. There's no profit in teaching people to grow food without buying products. There's no revenue stream in methods that make farmers independent. There's no business model in knowledge that eliminates the need for corporate supply chains. So the knowledge exists. The research is published. The results are documented. And somehow, it never reaches the people who would benefit most from learning it. Let me explain the SPIN farming model, because it proves this works economically. SPIN stands for Small Plot Intensive. It was developed specifically to demonstrate that small-scale farming could be financially viable, not just a hobby, a legitimate business. The benchmark for SPIN farming is $50,000 in gross sales from half an acre. That's $100,000 per acre in revenue. Most commercial farms would consider that number fantasy, but SPIN farmers achieve it consistently by focusing on high-value crops, direct marketing, and intensive production methods. They don't compete with industrial agriculture on volume. They compete on quality, freshness, and connection to customers. A SPIN farmer doesn't need a bank loan for a tractor. They don't need to lease hundreds of acres. They don't need to mortgage their future on equipment that costs more than most houses. They need knowledge. They need effort. They need a small patch of land and the willingness to learn. Cornell University's Small Farms program has documented these results. This isn't fringe agriculture. It's proven methodology that mainstream institutions have validated. And yet somehow, when people think about farming, they picture 1,000-acre operations with million-dollar combines. They picture investments that are impossible for ordinary people. They picture barriers that keep them dependent on the grocery industry. That picture was carefully constructed, and it serves specific interests that don't include yours. Here's the historical proof that Americans can do this. During World War II, the United States faced a food crisis. Agricultural workers had gone to war. Transportation systems were devoted to military needs. The food supply that Americans had taken for granted was suddenly unreliable. The government responded with a program called Victory Gardens. The campaign encouraged every American family to grow food. In backyards, in vacant lots, in parks, in any available space. They distributed seeds, they published guides, they taught techniques through radio programs and community classes. Americans responded beyond anyone's expectations. By 1943, 20 million Victory Gardens were producing food across the country. The U.S. population at the time was 132 million. That means roughly 1 in 6 Americans was actively growing food. And here's the number that should change how you think about everything. By 1944, Victory Gardens were producing 40% of all vegetables consumed in America. Not 4%, 40%. Nearly half of America's vegetable supply came from backyard gardens and community plots. 10 billion pounds of food from gardens that didn't exist 3 years earlier. Families who had never grown anything were suddenly producing significant portions of their own food. The government proved that widespread home food production wasn't just possible, it was achievable within a few seasons by people with no prior experience, using techniques far less advanced than what's available today. Then the war ended, and everything changed. Supermarkets began opening across America. Convenience became the marketing message. The food industry spent millions convincing Americans that growing food was old-fashioned, unnecessary, and a waste of time. Within a single generation, the knowledge that had fed the nation was nearly forgotten. Schools stopped teaching food production. Home economics classes disappeared from curriculums. The skills that had been common knowledge became rare specialties. Today, the average American can name dozens of grocery store chains, but can't identify more than a handful of vegetables growing in a garden. They know brand names, but not plant varieties. They understand shopping, but not growing. This didn't happen by accident. It happened by design. The grocery industry doesn't profit from your knowledge, they profit from your dependency. Every skill you develop, every vegetable you grow, every meal you produce yourself represents money that doesn't flow through their cash registers. So they made sure the knowledge seemed unnecessary. They made sure growing food felt difficult. They made sure the Victory Garden generation didn't pass their skills to their children. And it worked. For about 80 years, it worked perfectly. But the internet changed everything. Now the knowledge is spreading again, regardless of whether the grocery industry wants it to. Let me show you exactly how these intensive methods work. The core principle is simple but revolutionary. You optimize for production per square foot rather than production per hour of machine labor. Conventional agriculture is designed around equipment. Rows are spaced for tractors to pass between them. Plants are spread out to accommodate mechanical harvesting. The land serves the machines rather than the machines serving the land. Intensive methods flip this completely. Raised beds replace rows. Plants are spaced based on their actual needs, not equipment requirements. Vertical growing adds production capacity that conventional methods ignore entirely. A conventional garden might allocate 4 square feet to a single tomato plant. An intensive garden uses vertical trellising to grow that same plant upward, freeing ground space for additional crops. The same footprint produces multiple harvests. Succession planting ensures that something is always growing. Conventional gardening plants once and harvests once. Intensive methods plant continuously throughout the season. As one crop finishes, another takes its place. The soil never sits empty. The growing space never wastes potential. A single raised bed might produce spring lettuce, summer tomatoes, and fall brassicas in the same year. 3 harvests from the same forbiate space. 3 times the production from identical square footage. Companion planting maximizes biological synergies. Certain plants benefit each other when grown together. They share nutrients, repel pests, attract beneficial insects, and create microclimates that improve yields for both. Intensive gardeners study these relationships and design plantings that leverage them. The Three Sisters method that indigenous Americans developed centuries ago is a perfect example. Corn provides structure for beans to climb. Beans fix nitrogen that feeds the corn and squash. Squash leaves shade the ground, retaining moisture and suppressing weeds. 3 crops producing more together than any of them would produce alone. That's the power of understanding plant relationships. But perhaps the most important element is soil biology. Conventional agriculture treats soil as a medium for holding plants upright, while chemical fertilizers provide nutrition. The soil itself is almost irrelevant. Just add the right chemicals, and crops will grow. Intensive methods understand that soil is a living ecosystem. Healthy soil contains billions of microorganisms per teaspoon. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and countless other creatures form complex communities that process organic matter into plant nutrition. They create soil structure that holds water and air. They suppress disease organisms that attack plant roots. Chemical fertilizers disrupt this biology. They provide nutrients directly to plants, bypassing the soil ecosystem entirely. The microorganisms that would normally process organic matter have nothing to do, they die. Intensive methods feed the soil, not just the plants. Compost, mulch, and organic matter provide food for soil biology. The microorganisms multiply. They process nutrients more efficiently. They create conditions that make plants healthier and more productive naturally. And here's what's remarkable. Soil managed this way improves every year. Conventional agriculture depletes soil over time. Intensive methods build it. The longer you practice these techniques, the more productive your space becomes. Year 1 is good. Year 5 is better. Year 10 is extraordinary. The families producing thousands of pounds from tiny spaces didn't achieve those yields immediately. They built soil biology over seasons. They created growing environments that become more productive with every passing year. Now, I need to be completely honest about the challenges. This isn't a magic solution that requires no effort. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. The learning curve is real. These methods require understanding your specific climate, soil, and conditions. What works in California doesn't automatically work in Minnesota. What succeeds with one crop might fail with another. There's experimentation involved. There's failure involved. There's learning through doing. Your first season will probably disappoint you. You'll make mistakes. Some crops will fail. Some techniques won't work as described. This is normal. It's part of the learning process. Your second season will improve. Your third season will surprise you. By your fifth season, you'll be producing amounts that seem impossible to people who haven't done the work. Time investment is significant. Intensive methods require more hands-on attention than conventional gardening. You're trading dollars at the grocery store for hours in the garden, daily observation, regular maintenance. Ongoing management of multiple systems simultaneously. For some people, this trade makes perfect sense. The hours spent gardening are enjoyable. The food produced is superior. The skills developed are valuable. For others, it might not work. If you genuinely hate being outdoors, if your schedule allows no flexibility, if you have physical limitations that prevent garden work, these methods may not suit your situation. Climate creates real constraints. The Dervies family produces 6,000 pounds in California with year-round growing conditions. A family in Wisconsin has a much shorter season. The same techniques require significant adaptation for different climates. Season extension helps. Cold frames, row covers, greenhouses, and other techniques can stretch the growing season significantly, but they add complexity and cost. Northern gardeners work harder for equivalent yields. Access to land is the fundamental requirement. You need outdoor space, even a small amount. Renters face uncertainty. Apartment dwellers have limited options. People without yards need to find alternatives like community gardens or shared plots. These barriers are real. They prevent some people from implementing these methods regardless of their desire to do so. Pests, diseases, and weather happen. A hailstorm can destroy a month's work in minutes. Pest infestations can devastate crops. Disease can spread through a garden before you recognize the symptoms. Nature doesn't guarantee success just because you're using good methods. Experienced growers develop resilience through diversification. They plant many crops so that failure in one doesn't mean failure in all. They build systems that recover from setbacks, but setbacks happen to everyone. So why am I telling you this works despite these challenges? Because the alternative is continued dependency on a system designed to extract money from you. The average American household spends approximately $10,000 per year on food. That $831 per month, flowing from your wallet into an industry worth over $800 billion annually. Grocery prices increase every year. Supply chains face more disruptions. The food you buy travels an average of 1,500 miles before reaching your plate. It's harvested weeks before you eat it. It's bred for shipping, durability, not nutrition or flavor, and you have no control over any of it. A family that develops intensive growing skills has options. They can produce significant portions of their own food. They can reduce their dependency on supply chains they don't control. They can eat food that's actually fresh, actually nutritious, actually worth eating. The investment in learning pays dividends for the rest of your life. A garden that produces 2,000 pounds this year will produce 2,000 pounds next year, and the year after, and every year until you stop maintaining it. The skills you develop don't expire. The knowledge you gain doesn't depreciate. Meanwhile, every dollar you give to the grocery industry is gone forever. Here's how you actually get started. You don't need to transform your entire yard this weekend. That's a recipe for overwhelm and failure. Start small. Learn systems. Expand as your knowledge grows. A single raised bed is enough to begin. 4 feet by 8 feet gives you 32 square feet of growing space. That's enough to produce meaningful quantities of salad greens, herbs, tomatoes, and other high-value crops. It's manageable for a beginner. It's enough to teach you fundamental principles. Focus on crops that make sense for your situation. Salad greens produce harvestable food within 30 days. Tomatoes take longer, but produce huge quantities per plant. Herbs provide flavor you'd otherwise buy in expensive small packages. Start with crops that give quick wins and build confidence. Build soil biology from day one. Compost is the foundation of everything. Add it generously, mulch, to protect soil and retain moisture. Avoid chemicals that disrupt the biological systems you're trying to build. Think long-term, not just this season. Pay attention to what works. Keep notes on what you plant, when you plant it, and how it performs. Notice which varieties thrive in your conditions. Learn from failures as much as successes. Your garden will teach you if you're willing to observe. Connect with others doing this. The knowledge is available free online. Books, videos, forums, and communities exist specifically to share intensive growing techniques. The Dervies family has documented their methods. John Jevons has published extensively. Spin farming guides are accessible to anyone. The grocery industry isn't going to teach you this. They have no incentive to create independent customers. But the community of growers will teach you gladly because they're not trying to sell you anything. Expand gradually as your skills develop. Add a second bed in year 2. Try new crops. Experiment with techniques you've read about. Build your capacity systematically rather than all at once. By year 3 or 4, you could be producing hundreds of pounds of food. By year 5, you could be significantly reducing your grocery dependency. By year 10, you could be one of the families that visitors believe are producing so much from so little space. The families doing this now were beginners once. They started exactly where you are. They learned through doing. They built systems over time. The only difference between them and you is that they started. Let me leave you with this. The grocery industry has spent 80 years convincing Americans that growing food is impractical, difficult, and ultimately not worth the effort. They've been remarkably successful. Most Americans believe them completely. But 20 million families proved them wrong during World War II. Thousands of families are proving them wrong right now. The Dervies family produces 6,000 pounds from 1/10 acre. Families across America produce 2,000 pounds from 1/8 acre. The research shows biointensive methods produce 2 to 6 times conventional yields. The economics shows small plot intensive farming generates more revenue per square foot than industrial agriculture. The history shows Americans can learn these skills quickly when they have reason to learn. Everything the grocery industry told you about the impossibility of feeding yourself was designed to keep you dependent on a system that profits from your dependency. The knowledge is available. The methods are proven. The results are documented. 1/8 of an acre can produce 2,000 pounds of food. 1/10 of an acre can produce 6,000 pounds. The space you're using for lawn maintenance could be feeding your family. The only question is whether you'll learn or keep paying. The grocery industry is betting on you staying dependent. They're counting on convenience, defeating capability. They're confident that the system will keep working as designed. 20 million victory gardens proved what Americans can do when they decide to do it. Maybe it's time to prove it again. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps preserve this wisdom. The next vault opens soon.